For those of you who may not be part of Morehouse, my name is David Thomas, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of being the 12th president of Morehouse College. And I very briefly, when I heard that we were going to be able to have this event, and I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. I just thought it was an important place for me to be, to welcome all of you to what I think will be a very important conversation about civic engagement and thinking about the issues that are most important for our community, state, and local. We are in a very important moment as we go to the polls to elect the next mayor and to elect our city councilmen, city council persons, as well as we have with us John Eaves, who's running for a state role. And if we have learned anything in the last year, it is that elections do matter and leadership matters. And it is important that this youngest generation of voters who are represented by, in many ways, the individuals who are students on our campus, that you are engaged, because the decisions that we will make in these next few election cycles will be decisions that will cast, if you will, the stones for what you will inherit when you leave Morehouse as citizens. So this is a very important moment, and I'm very happy to see so many men of Morehouse here in the audience, because it says that you are engaged in thinking about how the future gets shaped. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Jones, who gets major credit and kudos for bringing this event together. Professor Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adrienne Jones. I teach here at Morehouse College in the Political Science Department, and I direct the pre-law program along with my colleague, Professor Murray. And I always want to give a shout out to the pre-law program and let you know that our mission is to make sure that you are ready to and able to make successful applications to law school if you are interested in doing so. And that is true for anyone of any major, not just political scientists. So please contact us if you are interested in doing that. I really want to thank the candidates who have agreed to come and visit with us today. Unfortunately, Andre Dickens had a conflict, and so he's agreed to Zoom in. But nonetheless, we have John Eaves, Felicia Moore, Jason Dozier, and they are all running for upcoming offices. Right now, of course, we have runoffs that end on November 30th, and those include City Council presidents, Districts 1, 3, 4, 5, 12, and Post 3 at large. So if you are in any of these districts, please make a plan to early vote or to vote on election day. And of course, we have a runoff in the mayor's race, which is keeping us energized and is just one more reason for you to get out this season and vote. I want to thank Professor Murray for agreeing to moderate this discussion. He's come up with some fresh questions, many of which we hope that you have not heard before. He is my go-to guy on local politics. because he is from Atlanta and stays abreast of what's happening here in the Atlanta area. So I want to welcome him to the stage to run this program, and I really appreciate you coming out today and being engaged citizens as the president suggested. Thank you so very much. Professor Murray?
Good afternoon. My name is Winfield Murray, and I will be serving as the moderator this evening. As Professor Jones just indicated, I am a professor here at Morehouse. I teach race and law, constitutional law, and I direct the moot court team here at Morehouse. I've also served as an attorney for, the past 2 decades, and most recently served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Bottoms. So first and foremost, I want to thank our panelists for attending this evening. As we are all aware, the runoff election is looming just days away on November 30th. I encourage all of you to go out and vote. Clearly, our candidates are exceptionally busy, but I am pleased and honored that they took time out of their schedule to join us at Morehouse tonight. I would like to thank the Alpha Rho chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity for sponsoring this panel. And last but certainly not least, I would like to thank each of you for attending. Local elections matter, and your attendance tonight demonstrates that you are invested in what happens in this city and who represents you. Local elections impact everything you do. Engagement with political, social, and civil issues is a fundamental component of an educated population. Seeing the surge in social awareness with Gen Z, it is safe to assume that this group desires to be involved. However, civic knowledge and education appear to be decreasing among adolescents and young adults. Tonight, the candidates on this stage have been invited to the campus of Morehouse for a discussion focused on civic engagement, social responsibility, and advocacy. The goal is that students and guests leave this event knowing how to get involved in their local government and ways to engage civically. Lastly, you will learn about the candidates and their perspectives on matters that concern you. So without further ado, we will begin with an introduction from the candidates, followed by questions from me. Then we will take audience questions, and finally, we will give the candidates an opportunity to give their final thoughts and remarks for the evening. So, candidates, if you could please introduce yourselves, beginning with City Council President Moore. 30 seconds.
Hello, and thank you all for wanting to hear from your elected officials and those who seek higher office. My name is Felicia Moore. I'm currently the president of Atlanta City Council, and I'm running to be our next mayor. I certainly believe that we have a lot of work to do in this city, from our safety, our city services, affordable housing, infrastructure, unsheltered population. There's a long list of needs in this city, and I want to address them. I have the experience, the know-how, and I'm day one ready to lead this city. I look forward to the conversation.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Eaves, and I want to be your next Secretary of State of Georgia. I am currently teaching in the Political Science Department at Spelman. I am a Morehouse graduate, but I also served for 11 years as the chairman of Fulton County Government, which is the largest local government in the state of Georgia. I'm endeavoring to be Secretary of State for several reasons. Most importantly, the issue of voting and political empowerment, but also the Secretary of State's office is one of the most powerful executive positions in the state of Georgia. It's not just voting, it's not just elections, but it's also business development. So I look forward to sharing more about my platform during the course of this evening.
Good afternoon. I'm Jason Dozier. I'm a candidate for Atlanta City Council District 4. I'm looking to represent Morehouse and Spelman and Clark Atlanta University on the Atlanta City Council. I am a native of Atlanta. I was born and raised in this city. I love this city, and it's a big reason why I am running. I was raised by a single mother, and she is who instilled in me the value of public service, which is why I ended up joining the Army in 2006. Served as an officer in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and have been a community organizer here in Southwest Atlanta for the last 6 or 7 years. Professionally, I'm a nonprofit leader. I work at a nonprofit that helps veterans find jobs across the country. But my heart is with this city. My soul is with this city, and I want to make sure the city does more to protect its residents and its next generation of residents. So thank you all once again. I look forward to the discussion, and that's me in a nutshell.
Councilmember Dickens, can you hear us?
Yeah, Councilman Dickens, can you hear us? Yeah.
Cannot hear. I'm on a 40-minute one. Is there another one? This is 40-minute Zoom, you know, like the, hello?
Councilman Dickens, can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Councilmember Dickens, we just allowed the candidates to briefly introduce themselves. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Andre Dickens, and I'm a native of Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised in Adamsville. I'm an engineer, became an engineer as the first in my family to go to college when I went to Georgia Tech. I am a father, I'm a deacon of a church, I've been a business owner for 10 years, and I'm the chief development officer for a technology company called TechBridge. I've been on city council the last 8 years, and as you can see, I have a full set of experiences that have prepared me to be mayor for the city of Atlanta at this time. I want to build and preserve 20,000 units of affordable housing. I want to make sure people have good paying jobs like I do with my training program for free at TechBridge in technology. I want to also make sure that we improve our transportation as I created the Atlanta Department of Transportation just a year ago. Last but not least, I want to make us safe to make sure that everybody goes home safely each day, that this community is back to where we need to be and that this crime isn't the new normal. I'm excited to talk to you all today. I have limited time, and I know this got off to a late start, but let's see what we can accomplish while we're together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dickens. Let's go ahead and jump right into it since you do have limited time. And let's begin our conversation with a discussion on crime. It is one of the biggest topics impacting our local elections, and it's probably one of the driving forces behind Buckhead's attempt to secede from Atlanta. What is your plan to reduce crime? And I'll also ask the same question to you, Council President Moore and Jason Dozier. Mr. Dickens?
Yes. So absolutely right. We are in a crime spike, and it's my job when I become mayor to make sure this is not the new normal. I have a plan that was the first public safety plan published out of all candidates in this race. And what I did was I went out to former police chiefs and asked them what they needed and what they thought would solve crime. And so I have a balanced approach to safety and justice and a smart on crime plan. It's called the Safe Streets Plan. You can look it up on my website, or you can go to Safe Streets Atlanta. And basically, we're 400 officers short. We're gonna hire 250 officers, but train them in a 21st century policing way to be racially sensitive, to de-escalate violence and crime, and also to be very capable of conflict resolution. And then we're gonna establish and empower APD to do community-based policing, get out of their cars, walk the beat for an hour or two out of each shift to get to know the gas station and convenience store owners, as well as those supermarkets and shopping centers, walk around and get to know and have a great community relations. This is also about youth crime. 60% of our crime is youth related. Once we bring down youth crime, we've brought down overall crime. When we solve the crime problem,
Thank you, Councilmember Dickens. Council President Moore.
Yes, so every neighborhood in this city deserves to be safe. I don't care what the zip code is or the area of town. And that is an issue that we have to address citywide. I have a 5 C's plan to address crime. And the top level of that is for children, dealing with them, but not only them, but supporting the families as well, so that we can break this poverty cycle of generational poverty in our city and give people a leg up. The second piece are our cops, making sure that we deal with reform issues that can pull away that blue wall of silence so that we can get cops to be able to express issues that they know that other officers have in the department, but at the same time adding to our police department and making sure we do it immediately, incentivizing those who have left to come back, getting their retirement pay and their pay. Also getting those that are behind the desk out on the street while we work to recruit more officers. And they do a good job arresting people with the courts, working with the court system to see if we can help them get cases adjudicated quickly. We have a lot of repeat and violent offenders. Working around our bars and nightclubs, getting the people who inspect them, getting those positions filled, half of them are vacant. And then finally working with the community, because we all have a role to play in our crime fighting efforts. And so it is a comprehensive approach, and it will go to every neighborhood in the city, and then working with our regional partners, because criminals don't know boundaries.
Thank you. Mr. Dozier?
I think during this campaign season, a lot of folks running for different offices have talked about changing the culture of policing in Atlanta. And I think we need to take it a step further and change the culture of public safety in Atlanta. Crime or public safety is more than just policing. We have to address the root causes of what's causing crime in this city. We need to address the root causes of poverty. A lot of our crime is committed by young people, people who, through no fault of their own, feel helpless and hopeless and join gangs and turn to opportunities because of some situation that's happening in their household. I had a young man killed right in front of my house last year, 18 years old, and I think about all the ways in which the city failed that young man. I think about the fact that our recreation centers have been closed for the last 2 years, so young people don't have anywhere safe to go when they get out of school. Gangs have taken advantage of that. I think about the fact that even before the pandemic, before we closed the recreation centers due to COVID, unless your kids want to play football or basketball, there weren't enough opportunities in those places. So we have to have more programming, get our nonprofits involved, mentor these young people so they don't get involved in situations that lead to disaster for not only their lives, but other people if they end up victimizing anyone. But we also do have to change the culture of policing. Like was said before, we have to get officers out of their cruisers. A lot of times they drive through my neighborhood going 100 miles an hour, not paying attention to anything happening in the community. When I was in Iraq, I was taught to get out of my truck, take off my helmet. I taught myself to read and write Arabic because I thought it would help me build rapport with the people I was supposed to protect. And unfortunately, our current officers don't do enough to build relationships with the communities they're trying to protect. So we have to change that culture. We got to get them walking our neighborhoods and talking to people. And at the end of the day, our officers in our police departments need to share resources across jurisdictions, across departments. We have APD patrolling our streets. We have Fulton County Sheriff's Office. We have Atlanta Public Schools has a police department, AUC, Georgia Tech Police, MARTA Police. We have to share resources, share intelligence, share information. I get we have to hire more officers to a certain degree, but we need to use the resources that we have, and I want to make sure we look at those solutions before we talk about putting an officer on every corner.
Thank you. Staying on the topic of crime, a headline in the Chicago Sun-Times recently read, "The Rittenhouse verdict was a message to white youth that if you believe Black Lives Matter, then your life means nothing." So what are your thoughts on the Rittenhouse decision? where Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all charges for fatally shooting Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum while seriously wounding a third during a Black Lives Matter protest over the shooting of Jacob Blake 7 times in the back. That question is for anyone. What are your thoughts on the Rittenhouse decision?
It was an awful.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I can't see who's answering first. So
Mr.
sorry.
Eaves is going to answer first.
It was an awful decision. You know, of all the things that I'm proud about, I'm a father. And I have a son who graduated from Morehouse, 26 years old. And I think that the verdict sort of states that if a white person exhibits a behavior and a black person exhibits the same behavior, the white person will be treated differently than the black person. And it's an unfortunate reality in this country, but we have to do all that we can to call it out. And so this is a verdict that is symptomatic of flaws in the criminal justice system. When I was chairman of Fulton County government, we did a lot in terms of criminal justice reform. We had 90% of our jail population African-American males, and we did a lot in terms of reentry. We incorporated the first ever expungement program for ex-offenders, people with offenses in Fulton County, in fact, in the whole state of Georgia. And so to me, this verdict is evidence, further evidence that racism is alive and well, and it's also playing out in politics. And I will certainly address this in more detail when it comes to voting, but it is a problematical decision.
1 second. I know, Mr. Dickens, you have to leave, and you wanted to answer or respond to that question.
Certainly. Thank you for asking that question, because that's really that's a key issue, is how do we respond to the national stage when things are happening across our nation, across our world. The Rittenhouse verdict was injustice, and the mayor of Atlanta and the city council have to call it just what it is. It was an injustice, it was a poor decision, and it's one that can be harmful, and is harmful, to the fact that armed people crossing state lines to do us harm has to be called out, and it has to be stopped. A Black Lives Matter rally is a place where people use their voices, where they join together to gather and to share their thoughts about an injustice, and then another injustice happens there where people lost their lives and were injured. So I made a statement about it, and my statement said pretty much what I just said, that I disagree with the decision, but I also stated that right here in the state of Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down, and he's an innocent man jogging, and armed quasi-vigilantes, supremacists, in my opinion, chased him down and killed him. And this is another scenario where unarmed people are being armed by people who are oppressive and in their minds have the ability to do so because the law is on their side. We have to call these things out, and we have to stick to whatever we call out, because it's important that we don't do any kind of flip-flopping or false equivalency on these issues. I think that it's troubling, and I'm watchful of what happens on this verdict. I'm prayerful more so than just watchful. I'm prayerful that the state of Georgia, the prosecutors, get this right down in the Ahmaud Arbery case, because 2 back-to-back injustices will really be destructive and counterproductive to the movements that we have, which is trying to make sure that we have fairness and justice and safety across our nation. And Atlanta being the bedrock of civil rights and human rights, we are watching these things carefully. And we've already got people in Atlanta down there making the case that we're not standing for this. And again, we have to stand firm as leaders. Whatever we say, we mean, and we don't have to move off of it when somebody else tells us that they disagree with us. So I stand by my statement.
Thank you. Councilmember Dickens, I'm not sure when you'll have to drop off, but I want to thank you for joining us this evening. And whenever you have to drop off, you can drop off.
Thank you all. Good job, dear old Morehouse. See y'all. Bye-bye.
All right, Councilmember Moore.
Yes, I made a statement, and I stand by any statement that I make, and I believe it's been categorized in the comments that we had. Life experience shows people how things happen, and understanding that it was a white gentleman who got off. And we understand if it was not in that case, that vein, there would have been a different verdict. Also, we've seen time and time again how vigilantism, I would call it, has played out in the national stage. But I do want to comment, because I do think my opponent is trying to throw a little shade here. And, you know, there's a truth and then there's your narrative. And so the narrative is that somehow I backtracked on my statement, and that is not true. I posted my statement, it's on my social media. I'm good with people not agreeing with my statement, because I know everyone does not share my life experience and where my statement comes from. And so many people attacked me for that particular statement. I was fine with that. But as the comments went on, there was a lot of vitriol between people and attacking each other. It just became hostile, violent, and a non-productive conversation. Unfortunately, social media is a good way to get out a message, but it's not a good way to communicate with people. And I decided that it was just such a nasty conversation, particularly in a very divisive time, that I made the decision to put it up, and I made the decision to take it down. Both decisions had consequences, and I don't make excuses, I don't make mistakes, and I own up to the consequences I have to take. But after a new narrative came out that somehow I had backtracked on my statement and got scared about somebody not supporting me, I knew when I put it up what the response would have been. I put the statement back up and explained why I took it down. So I just wanted to throw that out there for everyone to understand. But the statement is up there.
Thank you. There are two things that happened with the Rittenhouse decision. There was the decision that he was found not guilty on all charges, but there's also President Joe Biden's statement where he said that the jury system works and we have to abide by it. That was his remarks after the Rittenhouse decision was rendered. Do you have any thoughts on President Biden's statement? That can be for anyone.
I wouldn't say on his statement per se. But I think what he was, I'm not going to speak for him, but we have a judicial process. And at the end of that process, there's a decision made. And it doesn't mean that everybody agrees with that decision. And that's why I said to many of my supporters that were angry with me about the fact, well, it went through the courts, it had due process, and I believe in due process, but I also believe that when the process is done and the decision is made, if you disagree with that, you have every right to say that you have a disagreement with that. And that's what I did, and I'm assuming that he was talking about the process, but that doesn't mean you have to agree with the decision.
So I'm a supporter of President Biden, but I think his statement was too benign. He basically made a statement that did not acknowledge the obvious. I tell my students that the judicial system, even judges, there's no judge who's completely objective. I mean, judges are people who live experiences like all of us, and we are impacted by our experiences. And so judges make decisions sometimes based on their experiences, and there's evidence that shows it. There's evidence that shows that if a person walks into a courtroom and has a jumpsuit on and shackles, and another person who has posted bond and comes in with a suit, the person with the suit who committed the same crime as the person with the jumpsuit will get off. There's evidence. And so not only is there evidence that judges sometimes are subjective in their judgment, juries are also subjective in their judgment. And there's evidence that shows that, you know, certain characteristics yield a certain results. And so I think it was, again, I'm a supporter of his, but I was very disappointed with his response. He recanted it, he revised it. I think Vice President Kamala Harris had a more appropriate response. Hers was acknowledging that there are problems in the criminal justice system, and there really are. The problems in sentencing, problems in arrest, problems in the adjudication, problems in terms of release of prisoners, problems in terms of who can get better breaks when they get out of prison than those versus not, and a lot of it is according to race and economic status. And so I think we just have to acknowledge that race is a major problem in this country still. We may take 2 steps forward, but we also take 1.5 steps back.
Thank you.
I just think, and I'll be quick, I just think that it speaks to a larger issue that we have in this country where certain people, particularly folks from previous generations of political leadership, still have a lot of faith in our institutions, but don't recognize that a lot of our institutions are fundamentally broken, and we have to do more to make sure that we can fix those institutions and make sure that our future is not lost to vigilantism, not lost to state legislatures threatening to overturn elections, not lost to just this general malaise that has been affecting our country for far too long. And I think that, unfortunately, it feels too often, especially when you are wanting to make sure we get voting rights passed at the federal legislature or an infrastructure bill passed at the federal legislature. It feels like the people in charge are sticking their head in the sand on this. And as leaders, especially at the local level, we have to make sure that we are continuing to fight the good fight and make sure that people in Washington and people in Atlanta at the Georgia Capitol, or even the folks at City Hall, are paying attention and are vigilant themselves with regards to our democratic institutions and making sure they're protected at every level of government, because one slip can unravel this whole thing, and we need to be extremely vigilant, especially right now, especially what we've seen not only across the country, but right here in Georgia, where there was an attempt to overturn elections here as well.
I often tell my students that when I began my legal career, I began as a prosecutor, and I had the opportunity to set up or help establish Atlanta's community court. And what I learned during that time is that most crimes committed in this city are nonviolent. In fact, most people aren't Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer. So most people commit crimes due to lack of education, lack of fiscal resources, mental health issues, alcohol or substance abuse issues. But we have this wonderful court in the city of Atlanta, and it's called Community Court. And it effectively reduces crime while lowering the rate of recidivism. And I wanted to know from each of you, do you intend to support Community Court, and if so, how?
Yes, I will continue to support it, and I was also want to make sure that we can expand programs that focus our criminal justice system away from arrest, away from incarceration. I support closing the detention center downtown. I support tripling the budget of the pre-arrest diversion program so that folks who are suffering from mental health challenges, who are suffering from homelessness, those acts aren't criminalized and people have opportunities that they currently don't have right now because the pre-arrest diversion program operates from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. And if you are having a challenge or have a neighbor in need and it's a Saturday afternoon, then, well, you have to call the police. And unfortunately, that in itself creates this culture where police are always the first to arrive and the first to think about arrests in terms of how to deal with the situation, and that doesn't help anybody. We have to focus on decriminalizing a lot of the behaviors that you discussed earlier. Right now in the city of Atlanta, urban camping is a criminal action. Jaywalking is a criminal action. Moving goods at night is a criminal action. A lot of it is done in a way to stigmatize and to criminalize people trying to live their lives. And so we have to support the courts through rather more investment and making sure that we can make sure these programs are default whenever we think about how do we get people through these systems. But also we have to address these issues beyond that and decriminalize things that have put too many people in jail who have, through no fault of their own, have been persecuted in this city and in surrounding communities because they're homeless or are unsheltered. But also making sure that other systems, like I said, with the detention center and other ways in which we approach criminal justice in this city are changed so that we can focus on these broader holistic solutions to crime and public safety than what we've been doing for decades, because it clearly hasn't worked and we have to do more and do better.
Yes, I do support the community courts, and we'll be supporting it, making sure that they have the adequate budget and funding that they need to operate. Just as I mentioned, also, the city of Atlanta, the reason why our facility, our jail, is empty pretty much, other than maybe 20 to 50 people a night, is because we have eliminated the need for cash bail. And so that has made what our jail was almost primarily a homeless shelter where people were getting arrested for low-level offenses, put in jail, and having to stay in jail because they couldn't afford the bail to get out. And I was very supportive of that. I will say, just because he mentioned it, however, I do have a differing opinion on the use of our jail facility. There is a lot of good conversation about wellness programs and other wraparound services and things that we can do. Some of them are in our charter that we can certainly support through federal funding or others. Some of them we need to really be looking to our county and state partners, particularly as it relates to mental health issues. And I believe that we can find adequate spaces in city government and city hall and city buildings to be able to meet out those. But when I go to Rice Street Jail and I see the deplorable conditions and the very inhumane conditions that are being there, while Fulton County is looking to build another facility, which they most desperately need because the one that they have is just functionally obsolete. I do think that we need to partner with Fulton County and allow them to have more use of that facility. And with that use, we can increase the programming that we have. I certainly wouldn't want anyone to be in jail, but one thing I do know, we do have city code violations and city offenses, and if we do not have a facility of some sort, maybe even smaller, what will happen is they would have to be turned over to a state offense. And I wouldn't want people who are arrested for demonstrating or some low-level offenses to have to be turned over to a state charge and have a record that they can't clean up. So there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen about that.
Thank you. So Morehouse men and Spelman ladies and community, it's important when you make a decision about elected officials to understand public policy and the candidate's understanding of public policy. And so as chairman of Fulton County, and yes, I'm running for a statewide office, but I have 11 years of county experience. 70% of the folks in the jail were mentally ill. And so we developed this concept called accountability courts, which is encompassing of the community court idea that the city of Atlanta has. So you had mental health courts, you had drug court, you had, I think we even had a veterans court. And the purpose of these specialized courts was to come up with sanctions that did not say go to jail, but dealt with solving the problem. And so as a result of these accountability courts and the mentality of not so much imprisoning the nonviolent offender, but treating the issue that led to the crime, that in many cases was mental illness or substance abuse or some other ill, treating that was a more effective way to deal with over-incarceration as well as public safety. The final point I want to make is I noted that when I was the chairman of Fulton County, there were actually 2 jails in the city of Atlanta. You had the county jail and the city jail, and one of the few cities in the whole country that had 2 jails in it that incarcerated, for the most part, 90% black males. And so when I ran for mayor 4 years ago, I came up with the idea to close the city jail, the $35 million that fund the jail, reinvest those dollars into the community in terms of a prevention and an intervention model. So all of the things that lead to the school to prison pipeline, invest dollars to triage those points and to make sure that those folks don't fall off the track and end up in the criminal justice system. And so public policy analysis, looking at data and coming up with best practices, those are important when you choose a person running for public office.
And Mr. Eaves, let me ask you another question. When we look at the role of Secretary of State, can you describe the importance of the role and what made you decide to run for that office?
Thank you so much. So the Secretary of State office is one of the most powerful offices in the state of Georgia. There has never been a black person elected as Secretary of State in Georgia, and probably not in the entire Southeast. There's only one black person in the United States who has been elected to this position. And so, Mr. Murray, it is very few black folks have been in this position, and it's a very powerful position. It oversees the elections of all the county governments in a state, all 159 in Georgia. Manages the 8 million voter registration rolls in the state of Georgia. It also oversees and incorporates the 1.1 million businesses in Georgia that employs 1.7 million residents. It oversees 42 occupational professional organizations. So when you're a doctor or a lawyer, whatever, you have these certification requirements, the Secretary of State's office oversees the licensing boards of each of these professional organizations, and it also is responsible for the security, monitoring the securities, the financial advising system in the state of Georgia. It also it attracts foreign investment into the state. So it's a very powerful position, and it is a position that can have a tremendous impact on the lives of people in ways that they don't even realize. And so I'm running for this position because it is a great way to help people, to impact communities, and it's not just the voting piece, it's the business development piece, as well as some of the other areas that are referenced. And so I'm working hard to be the first, and it will be historic, but the most important thing is once I get elected, what I'm going to do while I'm there is going to be even more historic.
Okay, I have a follow-up to that question. What are your thoughts on redistricting and the impact that it is having on candidates of color, such as Lucy McBath out of Cobb County? And is there anything that students or community citizens can do to sort of help change that or help support those issues?
So thank you. So I majored in mathematics when I was here at Morehouse, so I love numbers. So Georgia has 10 million people. It has a 49% non-white population. Over the past 10 years, the state of Georgia grew its population by 10%, and it is now one of the most diverse states in the country. Because of the diversity, there actually should be more black representation that we have right now, and brown representation. Right now, Georgia already has more black members of Congress, more black mayors, more black sheriffs, more black district attorneys, more members of the state legislature who are black than any state in the country. And so the redistricting that's happening in the state of Georgia and the legislature and the law that passed earlier this year, Senate Bill 202, is designed to decrease black and brown representation in our state. And so redistricting is occurring, and it's designed to enhance Republican presence in the legislature and decrease the presence of Democrats and black and brown people in the legislature, as well as members of Congress. So District 6, which was flipped just north of here, North Fulton, Lucy McBath being the first black woman elected to that position, the state legislature used its power to redraw that district and stretch it north to Dawson, to Forsyth County, which are heavily red counties and districts and areas. And as a result of that, Lucy McBath today announced that she's actually going to run for office in District 7, which is a neighboring district. And so the state legislature has ineffectively has reduced a district by 1. And also our Morehouse alum, Sanford Bishop, who's in District 2, his district was also redrawn to make it more Republican friendly. And so we have to be aware that this is a numbers game, and the state legislature, which is currently Republican controlled, is concerned and scared and trying to do all that it can to minimize Democratic presence, Democratic involvement, Democratic electability, but more importantly, black and brown people's ability to have representation in our state.
Thank you. Thank you. In a second, I'm going to imitate someone who you have no idea even exists, but Phil Donahue. I'm going to run out into the audience and get your questions. So if you have questions, start thinking of them now. But before I take audience questions, this is an open question. A growing number of our students are simply unable to afford to live in the city of Atlanta. Legacy residents, those that have lived in our city for decades, are being displaced at an alarming rate. How will you address these concerns, and is there anything that communities can do to combat this issue?
Well, this will have to be my last question because unfortunately I have to be across town in 30 minutes. And certainly affordable housing is extremely important in the city. And also how much housing can you afford is extremely important. So I want to deal with it on two levels. One, on workforce development so that we can get people in jobs that are making above living wage. But as it relates to affordable housing, I think the quickest, best thing that we can do is use what we have. And we have over 400 acres of city-owned property that we can develop ourselves. When you own the ground, you can dictate what the affordability is. And so we want to build that densely and look at the spectrum of affordable housing to housing our unsheltered, to housing those below 50% of area median income, housing those that are students and city workers, and also making sure that we provide housing for that missing middle class. The second thing we can look at is our Atlanta Housing Authority property that has been sitting vacant for over 10 years. That is the property that is supposed to help those on the lower end of the income spectrum. But now that we're doing mixed income housing, we can also include some of those other people as well. And then finally, we have property in our Land Bank Authority that is sitting there waiting to be put back on our tax rolls. I want to work with NACA and other organizations, and I'm proud to have their endorsement on how we can get those infill lots built up where homeowners can apply for those, as well as looking at those properties that may be dilapidated and need a little love, that we can get housing back online and people in those houses. So those are some ways that we can quickly address affordable housing.
Thank you.
So I think Council President Moore is absolutely right. My three-word solution to this issue is to build more housing. A lot of times we talk about this issue in a way that unfortunately tries to really overthink the challenges that we have as a city. We have a housing shortage. We are building housing at roughly half the rate that we did 20 years ago, and a lot of people, whether you are a tech person, you work for Microsoft or work for NCR, and you've moved down here from Chicago or New York or the Bay Area, whether you are a Morehouse or Spelman or Clark Atlanta University student who moved to Atlanta to study here to get your education and you want to stay here, or whether you're right down the street and you graduate from Washington High School and you can't afford to live in a neighborhood that you grew up in because we have a housing shortage. We have a lot more people who want to live here in our communities than we do housing that's available to house everybody. And so what Council President Moore stated in terms of ways in which we can get more housing units online is absolutely correct. In my neighborhood of Mechanicsville, we have 25 acres of publicly owned land. Some of it's owned by the Atlanta Fulton County Recreation Authority that didn't get sold to Georgia State and Carter. Some of it's owned by Atlanta Housing Authority that has been vacant for the last 10 to 15 years. Some of it's owned by MARTA. Some of it's owned by Atlanta Public Schools. We have to make sure we can get these housing and get these public lands built so that more families have an opportunity to stay in this community. But one of the things that she did not talk about that I fully support is relooking at how we do zoning and how we do land use to encourage more density in more communities. Right now, there is legislation that's being debated at City Hall and in our neighborhoods and neighborhood planning units around, do we allow for a builder to build a duplex or a triplex by right? Do we allow for greater density around MARTA stations? And I support that because that's how we used to build housing in the city of Atlanta. And then sometime 40 or 50 years ago, we decided that we wanted to keep poor people out. We wanted to keep people out of our communities in these dense apartment buildings out of our communities. And if I bought a duplex today, I could convert that to a single family house. So no longer do you have two families living in that household, you have just one, but I can't convert it back to a duplex by right. I have to get a variance or I have to go through some sort of rezoning to make that happen. To me, that is wrong, and that's what's made it harder for people to find opportunities to stay in this city. That's what they call accessory dwelling units, where you have a garage, you convert it to a living space. Things that we used to do in the past, we are no longer able to do today. The example I share all the time is West End, right down the street, had 20,000 residents in the 1970 census, and today is only 5,000 residents. And we look at some of these old Victorian mansions with 4 chimneys and 5 chimneys, it's because you had 5 or 6 households living in that building, and today's only a single family home in a 3,000 square foot house. That has to change. We have to bring density back into our city like we used to have so that more people have more opportunities to stay in the city, and that's something I want to fight and lead on.
Thank you. Do you have time for a couple of questions from the audience? Okay. Do we have any questions from our audience? Okay.
Thank you both for being here tonight. My name is Ron Jackson Jr. I'm a freshman political science major, international studies minor here. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, here at Morehouse. And my question for both of you is, what is your plan on helping the youth in Atlanta? I know that a lot of youth are kind of like the product of the environment that they grow up in, and a lot of the cities in Atlanta are not safe, especially for the youth. So I mean, when they get off the bus, they have to have people walk them home just to make sure that they're not walking through drug deals, different crimes happening, and things like that. And I actually tutor at a school near Atlanta, and one of the things that I work with is a program called My Brother's Keeper. And it's working with a lot of kids who have behavioral issues and things like that that stem from being in these communities. So how would you go about, I guess, fixing that issue and making sure that the turnout rate, especially for African American men and women and young boys and girls, is increased from grade school to middle school to high school to college? Because we need to produce the black leaders that we need to see in America. And I think that does start here in Atlanta and moves out throughout the country. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that on one hand, especially for our youngest, making sure we have programming available for them through our city-owned facilities. We have roughly 25 recreation centers across the city of Atlanta. Like I discussed before, they've been closed for the last 2 years. And so making sure there's programs for young people to go to have enrichment opportunities, music, arts, robotics programs, things that they are not as robust or as common in schools because of guidelines that our school board is working through with regards to curriculum and things like that. There's no reasons why the nonprofits who are already doing good work in this city shouldn't have a safe place to provide that good work. I think about Bearings Bike Works in Adair Park, who teaches kids how to build bicycles from scratch, and they learn how to own and maintain those bicycles. They learn hard skills in addition to soft skills. I think about Music Education Group, which was based out of Dunbar Recreation Center in Mechanicsville, now does a lot of work in East Point because our recreation centers have been closed. A lot of these kids want to be singers and rappers and musicians. Well, let's learn how a recording board works. Let's learn how a soundboard works, how the science behind music recording. You have good organizations doing good work, and we need to scale that work up, and I want to make sure the city does that. But I also want to make sure that all of our young people, whether you're in college or whether you're in high school or you're in middle school, are engaged with the city in a meaningful way. That means connecting with young people, getting them involved in city government, getting them involved in even political campaigns. I'm proud that 5 of my campaign fellows are Atlanta University Center students. A few of them are in the room tonight, and they've been helping me knock on doors and call voters and reach out to people. Thousands of doors this cycle. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And so I wanted to make sure that as a campaign, as a candidate, that my values are centered around young people and making sure that we bridge the gap from the old to the new so the next generation of Atlantans know how to operate in the city and how to succeed in the city. And we have to take that mindset into our high schools, into our middle schools, and get buy-in in ways that, unfortunately, young people have felt excluded for a long time, and I understand. And so they don't go vote in the same numbers, they don't show up at the neighborhood association meetings in the same numbers, but they're community members too. They live in our neighborhoods. Their stakes are just as high as my stakes are. And so I want to make sure sure that culturally we're connecting those and bridging that gap in a much more meaningful way than we've done before.
So I think that's a good question. And I'm going to ask the audience a question. How many of you are small business owners? So a few of you are small business owners. How many are registered with the Secretary of State's office? Okay, so I am noticing as I go out and about the entrepreneurial spirit among young people. However, a lot of young people do not have their businesses legally registered with the state of Georgia. And what that does, once you become a registered legal entity, you can actually become eligible for grants through the Small Business Administration, the City of Atlanta, et cetera. But if you have a side hustle and you just collect cash and you're not a legal business entity, you can't be eligible for these type of programs and these financing options because you're not legal. And the biggest hurdle for a lot of young people is the registration fee. And so I want to waive that fee for first-time business owners who are a certain age so that they can become legal business entities, and with that carrot that I offer to them, provide them some training on bookkeeping and all the other essentials that are needed to be a successful business operator, and also to explain what's the difference between an LLC and a C Corp, sole proprietorship, et cetera. And so that's the first thing I want to do, is to really make small business ownership sort of a very easy path for young people, especially teenagers, who have this entrepreneurial spirit. Those kids who are selling water bottles off the interstate, they have an entrepreneurial spirit, but why not channel that spirit in a more substantive, concrete way? And the second thing I want to do is promote something what I call social entrepreneurship. So can you have a small business, whether it's a nonprofit or whatever, that addresses a social need? And in the state of Georgia, like I did when I was chairman of Fulton County, along with my other commissioners, we funded nonprofit organizations, human service organizations, arts organizations, and I want to bring that same concept to the state of Georgia, and I'm going to call it social entrepreneurship.
Okay, here you go.
Hello, my name is William Murphy, and I'm a sophomore philosophy major from Nashville, Tennessee. I really appreciate you taking the time here to come and speak to us. One of the concerns I have as a person who has worked in voter registration with the Tennessee Alliance of Black Lawyers is the fact that, like you said, there have been many bills passed that restrict the voting rights of people in Georgia and limit us as Black people from making a change. My question for you all is, what can youth do to actually make an impact in terms of voter registration and in terms of combating malpractices such as redlining?
So, great question, and I'm going to answer the question in several ways. In the state of Georgia, we actually have more people registered as a percentage of the population, one of the highest rates of people registered. I think it's 80–90% of the eligible population actually a registered vote. But on the back end, it's something called purging. So if you don't vote within 3 years, or if you move, you can be purged from the registration rolls. And then you show up at the polling booth, and they say, you've been purged, and even though you were supposed to have been notified. And so I would want to do something in terms of the purging. Is too aggressive. We're one of the most aggressive states in terms of purging. There really should be only two reasons why you're purged from the election rolls. Number one, if you move out of the state of Georgia, or you move from District 4 to District 5, you can't vote in District 4 anymore, or if you die. And I know that sounds kind of cavalier, but those are really the only two reasons, in my opinion, that you should not be eligible to vote. The other thing that people don't realize is about the certification process. The State Board of Elections certifies elections with the Secretary of State being a part of the process. And I'm going to call this out because I believe in diversity wholeheartedly. Our State Elections Board of Georgia has 4 members who certify elections in our state, who have the ability to change the governance of a local election board, that board does not have a black person on it. And that's unacceptable, in my opinion, in this state that has 32% black population. So at a minimum, for me being elected as Secretary of State, I'm going to call folks out if they do anything that I consider to be improper and not in the best interest of all voters, especially black and brown voters. I have a problem with this state not having a black person on the state election board with all of this diversity we have in this state and the power that it has in the elections process. Most people have no idea that there is no black person on that board. So I'll do something in terms of purging, and I want to make sure I will be the representative on that board to make sure that black and brown communities are protected.
And one thing I'll add, I recognize that the city of Atlanta doesn't have a ton that it can do in terms of voter registration or voter engagement in the ways that the state or the county can do, but we can't hold ourselves accountable and hold our county government accountable. And I think the fact that Fulton County, where it set up early voting locations for this election right now has, in my opinion, disenfranchised too many of our residents. Thinking about the fact that you can't go vote at the county building like you have been able to do in years past, right downtown off of Pryor Street, can't vote there. Usually you can't this time. And so with the different races, I know we talked about there's runoffs for districts 1, 3, 4, 5. Well, for districts 1, 3, and 4, there are no early voting locations. And we have, in those 3 particular voting districts, we have the lowest early voting numbers in the entire, this entire cycle. In fact, for District 4, we've had about 500 people early vote so far. 4 times as many people have voted up in Buckhead in those districts. And that changes the dynamic of who has access to the ballot, when can people go to the polls. And we have Thanksgiving this week, and you can imagine how people are scrambling just to have an opportunity to vote. So we have to hold ourselves accountable. The city should be talking to Fulton County and saying, what the heck is going on? Why can't we get more polling places open so more people can vote? And that's what I want to be able to do, to make sure more people have access to the ballot box in ways that, like I said, is not exactly tied to voter registration. It's not technically tied to what Commissioner Eaves was saying with regards to purging, but there's things that the city can do from an advocacy standpoint, and we're the largest city in the region. We should be able to have a stronger voice when it comes to getting people access to the ballot box.
We have just a few more questions. We're going to take a few more, and if we could just keep the responses maybe to 1.5 minutes so we can get through them.
Good evening. My name is Jared Williams. I'm a sophomore political science major from Austin, Texas. And Mr. Eaves, you briefly mentioned the school-to-prison pipeline, which is a growing issue not only in Georgia, but the greater United States. For both of you on both a local and state level, what are y'all's intentions to combat that, to keep students in classrooms and out of cells?
At the city level, I think that means having greater and stronger partnerships with our schools, with the Atlanta Board of Education. We've been operating in silos for way too long, and usually anytime we work with the school board, is usually because there's some point of friction where, property taxes, the Beltline was a big issue a few years ago with the schools not getting enough revenue from the Beltline tax allocation district, and so we have to be partners. We're in this together. We might be separate governments, but we are all working to make Atlanta the best city that we can be, and I think that making sure that, and I'm going to talk about recreation centers again. I think that the fact that many of our recreation centers are co-located with schools. You have FL Stanton and C.A. Scott Recreation Center in Mosley Park. You have Dunbar Elementary School and Dunbar Recreation Center in Mechanicsville. To me, that's a great opportunity for a seamless transition between what happens during their learning day and what happens once school is out, while many of our parents are working 2 or 3 or 4 jobs and taking MARTA and are not able to be home. So making sure we have a positive relationship, talking and building together so that we have a more seamless transition for more learning opportunities once school is out, I think is a way to do that. And unfortunately, at least with the old guard leadership we've had in the city, we've been unable to get over old complaints or old gripes, and I want to move us forward in a positive direction.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm very passionate about the black male, going all the way back to my time here at Morehouse. I think for the position that I'm aspiring to, Secretary of State, I've already alluded to it already, but it's really in the area of supporting and encouraging entrepreneurship among young people. And I find that the young black males in particular, they can be aggressive, they can be positive hustlers. They do have a go-get-em attitude sometimes or most of the time. Why not cultivate that into entrepreneurship in terms of a business? So that's one part of it. And the other part of it, again, is empowering organizations through grant funding programs to support young people, especially black boys. We had the question over here earlier about my brother's keeper. I was very proud of the fact that we had one of the strongest my brother keepers entities during the Obama administration. In fact, President Obama recognized it. And so we brought everybody in the room. Instead of these various organizations working independently, we got them to work collaboratively in a coordinated effort. And it was based on the Harlem Children's Zone concept, where everywhere along the delivery from prenatal to adolescence to infants to adolescents, et cetera, you did something to support black males to keep them on the up and up. And so I think the social entrepreneur idea is probably the best thing I can do to support your concern or address your concern.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kavika Smith. I'm a sociology junior from South Central LA. And one of my questions is, how do you make sure that you're not criminalizing poverty and mental health while also preventing gentrification in connection with redeveloping the neighborhood, especially like the West End area? How do you make sure that you're creating access dwelling units and making sure that you create transitional housing and homeless shelters for folks while not encouraging developers to come in and to redefine what does it look like to live in these black neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a tough question. It's one that I want to tackle head on. I think that, like I mentioned before, finding opportunities to get more housing units online as quickly as possible is something we have to be focused on. Zoning is one way to do that, but also I'm a strong believer in this concept of community benefits agreements. The reason why I got into, not necessarily this election, but I ran for the same seat in 2017, and I got into this race because of the failure of the city to force a community benefits agreement for the communities around Turner Field. 68 acres of public land were sold to a developer at super low cost, and unfortunately there was nothing in writing that guaranteed that the neighborhood would benefit in the long term, whether it's housing, whether it's job opportunities, whether it's having access to Georgia State University amenities. So I want to make sure, whether it's the Mall West End, whether it's Fort McPherson, whether it's Murphy's Crossing, that any sort of deal involving the sale of public land includes a community benefits agreement, so that we have guarantees about the number of new housing units, low to moderate income housing units, or transition housing, or housing for our unhoused population. That's baked in, and that's a non-starter. So if you're going to take public money from us, whether it's through Invest Atlanta or you're going to take public land from us, we have to make sure that we have a community benefits agreement involved in the process. And the failure for the city to do that and do development deals across the entire city of Atlanta is a big reason why I decided to run in the first place, to make sure that developers are being held accountable too. And I recognize that along the Beltline, we're close enough to the Beltline where they have what they call an inclusionary zoning. So they have to have a set aside for certain types of housing. We need to have sets aside for people at the 20% margin, so making $20,000 a year, not just people making $80,000 a year.
Hey, our final question.
Good evening. My name is Kior Shropshire Maina. I am a freshman double major in political science and physics from Mount Vernon, New York. And I'm glad that we started off this conversation talking about crime and policing in the city of Atlanta, because that's something that's extremely important to me, and I know that is something that's extremely important to the men of Morehouse as well, and the women of Spelman. And as was stated, we saw a rise in violent crime in Atlanta, right? But then but we also in 2020 saw a national call for significant police reform and the full addressing of systemic racism in our institutions. And I know, Mr. Dozier, you mentioned plans such as changing police culture, race sensitivity training, and familiarizing the police force with their communities. But I also know that these are things that have been proposed before. right? And we are still in the similar situations that we have been before. So can you speak on your unique strategy for addressing the double-edged sword of addressing the rise of crime in Atlanta? And I know a lot of people suggested like hiring more police officers, but also protecting the innocent black men and women that face racial profiling and injustice in our policing system.
A great question.
That was a great question.
So one thing I will say is that the Atlanta Civil Review Board, which oversees police accountability, needs more teeth. Unfortunately, the accountability measures that we have in the city for police misfeasance or malfeasance isn't strong enough to really get our people the redress that we need. So I want to make sure that that happens, whether it's more funding, whether it's changing in the law so that there is greater opportunity for people to push back whenever there's police mistreatment. We have to make sure that that happens. But one of the things that I've been supportive of for some time, when I talk about changing the culture of police, and that means also making sure that people who are in charge of police doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's a uniformed officer who spent 30 to 40 to 50 years in uniform. That's where all of our police chiefs come from. I support going back to the old system where we used to have a public safety commissioner in the city of Atlanta, and having someone who had not spent their career as a police officer allows them to think more broadly about how we address public safety in a much more holistic way. I think I liken it to why we have civilian leadership in the Department of Defense, for instance. By having someone who's outside of that institution, you have a greater opportunity for change in that institution. That person can also oversee fire. That person can also oversee the pre-arrest diversion program so that police officers aren't being promoted based on the number of arrests that they make. The number of diversions that they make should be part of their promotions, but should be a part of their incentivization program so that they're not trying to arrest people just so they have more points for these opportunities. So to think more holistically about policing, we have to make sure that the people who are leading our charge of public safety aren't tied to that institution, because it's hard to break old habits. And I say this as someone who still uses Army jargon, and I've been out of the Army for 10 years. And so we have to think holistically about these issues, but that means changing the structure on how we do public safety in the city, and to make sure that we have, whether it's facilities or resources or systems in place that are gonna continue to grow that and expand that. And I think we have some seeds of that. I talked about the pre-arrest diversion program. It only operates from 7 to 7. We have had discussions around what happens to the detention center, but we have to move these things forward in a meaningful way so that we can think more broadly about how public safety is done in the city of Atlanta. Focus on the youth, mentor the young people, making sure that they don't get involved in crime in the first place, versus putting an officer on every corner and addressing crime after the crime has already been committed. I think that's how we have to move the ball forward on that.
Okay, Barrington, Josiah, you want to close us out? And while they approach, I just want to take a second to thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to thank each and every one of you all for coming out today. You know, the most important part of our democracy is the citizen. And each and every one of you all coming out today shows your desire to be more informed citizens about the issues facing our communities and our nation. And for that, I thank you.
Indeed, thank you. The most important thing is voting. You being out here shows that you care about what happens in the city, and so thank you for that.
I don't think we have any more announcements, so thank you all for coming, and you all have a great evening.